This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Is the occult a source of evil in the world? Or is it our vehicle for liberation? This is my interview with Conor Habib. I am joined from Dublin, Ireland, by my good friend Conor Habib, who has now been there for 4 years. And you and I started our podcast in the same year, 2017, and you were one of the very first guests on the show, and you've been on the show, I think, 3 times. And but Conor just wrote a book that I just read, and it's a novel. It's a weird thing. It's called a novel. It's a work of fiction. The thing I used to do, I used to read novels, Conor. I used to read them, and I used to love them, and I used to feel affirmed and full in the best way, and so satisfied, and learn things about myself when I read novels, and I learned things about my immediate world when I read novels. And I always said to myself, you got to keep reading novels. And then I stopped, because when you become interested in politics, politics takes away all the goodness in life. It makes everything hard and brittle and cold and mean. And I no longer read novels, but because I was going to interview you about something completely else, different, I said, well, I need to read Conor's novel, which came out, I think, was it in June?
July. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to say, I mean, I had no idea if you could write a novel. I didn't know if it was going to be any good. I'm just going to be honest, I love you. I think you're brilliant, but I didn't know if you could write a novel, because writing a novel is a whole different thing. I mean, I've been a professional writer for 40 years now, for 40 years, and I don't think I could do what you did. So I sat down with it, and it's amazing. It's amazing.
Thanks, man.
It's doing really well, and it's getting great reviews, and a lot of people are reading it. And other things are happening with it, which I can't talk about, which also suggest that it's doing extremely well. But and I can see why immediately. So your observations in it, which is really what makes a novelist great, you just don't find anywhere else, right? I mean, you just don't find, certainly in political writing, nonfiction writing, you don't find.
Yeah.
In the very best movies, maybe sometimes, but there's an attention to the detail of life that I find myself very self-conscious in a good way. Like when I read your novel, it's I see you noticing things in people that I know happen in myself. And even though your characters are not me, I mean, they're very different than me in a lot of ways, some sort of obvious ways, but there is a lot of shared experience that you're paying attention to and calling attention to that I wish we would do more of as a society. I think that the details, the small stuff, the day-to-day and the here and now, especially in the interactions between people, what is unsaid in conversations, what you and I are thinking right now, right? You find in the novel, you actually expose that in a novel. So in a conversation in your novel that's going on, you'll also see the thought bubbles in each character's head, right?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. So third person.
Yeah. So I just want to say, really, congratulations and thank you for adding this to the world.
Thanks, man. And for people that want it, It's
yeah,
called
so sorry, Hawk Mountain. Hawk Mountain.
This is it. It's out from Norton. And yeah, I mean, it's funny. So two things. One is to just sort of echo your story and also toot my own horn a little bit. The other person that said what you said, which is like, I had no idea if you could write a novel, was Anthony Jeselnik, who talked about it on his podcast. And he was like, I just thought this was another one of his vanity projects. And he's like, but it turns out it's really fucking good. And I was like, that's great, you know, and it's definitely gotten a lot of praise from authors that I love, Clive Barker and Brian Evanson and some other people. But let me just say what the book is about for a second, and then I want to address what you're saying about the politics kind of making thing, you know, sort of calcifying things. So the book is basically about two men who went to high school together. So there's Todd, and then there is a new student, Jack, who relentlessly bullies Todd. But most of the book takes place 15 years later. They haven't seen each other since high school. Todd is sitting on the beach with his son, Anthony, who's 6, almost 7, playing in the water. Todd sees someone coming up the beach. And of course, because it's novel, you know, shit is going to go down. And it's Jack. And Jack, for very complicated reasons, says, can I stay with you for the night? And Todd, even though Jack was his relentless bully in high school, for very complicated reasons, says yes. And then Jack won't leave. And things start spiraling out from there until there's a really horrible thing that happens about, you know, little more than a third, maybe half the way through, and then everything just loses it. So yeah, and I one of the things, you know, I went on a book tour. It was about 2 weeks long in the US, great book tour. All the events were packed, which was, I mean, I can't tell you how gratifying that is, you know. But I was thinking like, well, what do I do? Like these sort of events, you know, at bookstores with people that read novels, like, what am I doing here? The podcast is about intersections of, you know, politics and spirituality and economics and, you know, all these other kinds of things. And I just thought, you know, why is it that that stuff that's in the cultural sphere is always made to submit to the political sphere? Why is it that so many fucking novels are really just political statements, you know, and therefore not truly novels? Why is it that, you know, the statement that everything is political makes even our art and things that we find beautiful and gratifying just subjects to, you know, the state essentially? And so a lot of what I was doing on the book tour is just kind of standing up for culture, you know, standing up and saying this has its own value, its own weight. Because even in the marketing meetings, I mean, I love my publisher. I love them. It's Norton. They're worker owned. They're a major publisher, but they're worker owned, which is like, I mean, you don't hear about that, you know. And they I love them, and everybody on my team I love. But the first conversation was like, so how do we make this like, you know, like this is like a queer novel, or this is like about toxic masculinity or whatever? And I was like, no, it's not about any of that. And I don't want any of those words on the book. If I was like, if someone reads it and gets that out of it, I love that. That's great. But that can't be a marketing device, because what that's immediately doing is destroying the individual's relationship with art. And they have to have the freedom to engage with it in the way that they want, take it up the way that they want, move with it the way they want. And that's what they find there. And many people have. And then one of the people who blurbed the book did find that there. Andrew Lawler, who's a great writer, wrote a book called Politics, the Form of a Mortal Girl, which is just about someone who can change their body shape and just has sex throughout the whole novel with different people. It's a great fucking book. But I just wanted people to have their own relationship with it and experience the freedom of engaging with art as an individual. And so so yeah, I mean, point taken. What you're saying, it's like the political, even if you're not immersed in it all the time like you are, if you're bringing that lens to art all the time, it can't ever really function in the way it's supposed to function, which is culturally, and that's a shame.
God bless you for that. That's one of the things I was thinking as I was reading it, is that I was actually, one of the things I thought as I was reading it was, has Connor ever called himself queer?
I
You
used
know?
to, back when it meant something, back when it wasn't an
Yeah.
aesthetic term,
Right. Right.
when it meant that there was a political lens, a radical political lens that was being applied, that was somehow related to sex, but now it's in ornamentation mostly. I think it's still meaningful ornamentation for some people, and it definitely helps them find their way. But I wouldn't, I would refer to myself in that as shorthand sometimes, but not as
Right.
a general principle.
So there is homosexuality in this novel. People should know that.
That's your trigger warning,
No,
homosexuality.
but don't be afraid of it. But I was going to say, no, there is homosexuality in the novel, but it's not a queer novel. It's not, I don't read it as
Yeah.
queer in terms of politics, right? It's not, do you? I mean, is this?
No.
No.
I mean, look, there are, there's a lot about sexuality in the book and repression. And I think, usually what people do when they write books about wanting people to know something about queer people or LGBT people, they'll write, here's a character who's coming out of the closet and having these experiences. It's very literal.
Right.
And I there are some books like that I like. So
Sure.
before, let me qualify the statement I'm about to make with that. There are actually a lot of books like that I like.
Me too. Yeah.
However, if the demand is that you relate to the character to appreciate the book, then the book is already done by the time the reader comes to it, in a way.
Right.
And because they're already on board. What I wanted to do was evoke a feeling in people that wasn't literal, but that was actually just the experience of the horror of dealing with repression. And also, and that mostly, gay, queer, lesbian, trans people deal with in one form or another. And for people who didn't feel that, to actually experience those feelings. And then for the people who did, to sort of relate and be able to reflect and sort of mediate those feelings within themselves. But I think, that literal mindedness, it can only sort of take you so far and take certain people, with you. But what I wanted to do was really evoke a feeling. And I think that's why it's not, like you're saying, it's not some queer writing book or whatever. And again, I feel like I have to keep saying, I don't know why. Everybody knows I support that kind of stuff. So I don't know why I need to keep couching in those terms, but like, I do like some of that stuff as well.
Right. So I might have told you this at one point. I think I did, that since the age of about 15 or 16, maybe earlier even, I've been reading gay novels, basically gay literature, sort of the coming out stories that you were talking about, the classic coming out stories, and just some of the greatest books I've ever read, and extremely moving. As a straight boy, I was reading this stuff, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what that means, but maybe you can help explain.
Well, I mean, I think some of those novels, are, they're novels of people being reflective on their experience. I mean, you can put an Edmund White novel next to a Herman Hesse novel and say that these are people, sort of reflecting and encountering different aspects of their being. And I think that's worthwhile for anybody. And I also think everybody struggles with their own sexuality. Everybody struggles with their sexuality, their desires, what they want, who they want to be with. It's a lot different when what you're struggling with is also regulated and oppressed by the state in very specific and extra ways, and stigmatized by society in extra ways. But, everybody deals with that in some way or another. So I also think you could find affinity there, if it was something that you wanted to be reflective on.
I think I know actually what it was that that I found so compelling about those books and about your book too, which is the study of repression
Mm,
that's in them. And I don't know, this doesn't explain why I was into it,
mm,
um because I mean, well, everyone deals with repression. Everyone is repressed to some extent, right? So maybe
mhm,
that's it. But I just felt like there was something about the gay male, especially gay male experience, that was really moving to me. It was about, and again, this was in the 70s, right before, when the
mm.
closet was still very much a thing, and in the 80s too, when the closet was still very much a thing. It was just simply seeing people get liberated. And my uncle's experience, I might
That's
have
yeah.
told you about. Yeah, my uncle, I told you about, I think, right? He came out when he was 42, I think. Was married and had 3 kids, and announced in one day to his family, I'm gay and I want to get a divorce." And then, but then he moved, and then so we were living here in the Bay Area, my father and I. And after Dave came out, he would come visit us and stay with us for, many
Mm,
days, and he would spend the whole day in San Francisco,
mm,
just like he was going to Disneyland. And I mean, he would just have the best day in the Castro district. He'd go to all the clubs, bars, stores, whatever, come home with all these trinkets and souvenirs. He'd go to the bathhouses, came home with a boyfriend a couple times, and he was just, I've never seen such happiness in a human being. Never
yeah.
in my life. To this day, I've never seen a human being that happy. And he
I mean
got,
that's
yeah,
it's really beautiful, and I mean I think you're exactly right. Like where there's a repression, there's also hope for liberation, and
yeah,
seeing people that do that, like to quote Amber Hollibaugh, the sex workers' rights activist, she said, queer people, they're natural teachers in a lot of ways because they know how to choose desire where desire is forbidden, and I
wow,
think that that's really profound. And then also,
wow. Mhm.
I've had Dean Spade on my show a bunch of times, the um, anarchist organizer, and Dean has said, like, look at total transformation and liberation is possible in any aspect in your life in any moment, and we need to remember that. And I think that that's so profound, and that is just the potential for that, also the potential for forgiveness that allows in you as well, the capacity of forgiveness that permits to be like, all right, everything's on the table, because freedom is real.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
free will, but also free action and free feeling, those are all available. So everything's on the table, so we can also be ready to forgive and ready to access the forgiveness that's available for us, and also know that everybody's capable, of anything, which
Yeah.
sounds terrifying, but I think is also ultimately liberatory.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I guess that is what is most moving about books like this, is that it's about repression, but it shows people choosing freedom,
Hmm.
in with a lot at stake too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, a whole lot at stake, sometimes their own lives at stake. But and that's just, to me, it's just a story of freedom. And I guess, that's maybe the beginning of my attraction to freedom politically, which I
Mm.
then took up in earnest later, much later in life, in my 40s, when I started messing around with libertarian type politics.
Hmm.
But I think actually the beginning of my interest in freedom politically, I think, really was in those gay books, those gay novels, and the coming out stories in particular.
Well,
Um,
and isn't it
yeah,
interesting that all those liberatory moments can also just then be commodified and cycled back into what people think is, freedom, but it's not really, because people miss the actual gesture and they see it as just the content of the liberation, but it's the gesture of liberation that matters. It's not, oh, this person needs to come out to be free. I mean, obviously, I think coming out is probably a good thing for anybody, but it's more like it's what happens in the coming out that matters. It's not necessarily that everybody do everything the same way, or everybody proclaim their identity in the same way, or that everybody
mm,
take the same actions in society, but rather that they access something that is truly liberatory.
that's individual, you mean?
I think I think there's an individual component to it for sure.
Yeah.
And then I also think that there's a part that's kind of the same, which is, um, real freedom is something like thinking with intention, feeling with, clarity, and acting with purpose. And how often do we do any of those things? I mean, almost never. That would be real freedom, because otherwise we're just in sort of currents of compulsive behavior. And then also having compassion for others to sort of muddle through all of that. I think that's compassion is usually an act of freedom.
Say this thing again about enacting freedom, because I think it's really important. And I'm afraid people are going to miss. I'm afraid I missed it. Well, the full meaning of it, because I think what you just offered there is a real guide that could be very, very useful for people. So intentionality is at the root of it. For you? Like
thinking with intention, feeling with clarity, and acting with purpose. Okay. Those things usually aren't accessible to us. And in fact, we get most of what people call freedom usually is either defiance or domination. And those things are not freedom. Those things are very often born out of compulsive action, just like anything else. There's something much different about thinking in freedom, like free thinking, that's just not like that at all. And there's so many conversations about freedom over the past however many years, but especially the past 3 years or since the Trump administration, or whatever you want to say, that people are confusing, what freedom is truly for things that just sort of externally look like freedom. And I think that that's unfortunate.
So resistance and rebellion, defiance, that's what we think of as freedom.
Yeah.
Often. Yeah, I love that. You're right.
That's what Americans think of as freedom for sure. That's and right. Irish people too, to some extent.
Yeah. Well, famously.
Yeah.
That's right. Certainly in my world, in the world of sort of radical politics, whether it's left wing or right wing, that's definitely how it's perceived, isn't it? And I love this, resistance, rebellion, defiance, I don't feel free when I'm enacting those things. I'm feeling like I'm in fact, I'm somewhat of a slave to the oppressor in that case, right? Because 100%. What I'm doing is in response to and reaction to because of them, because of what the oppressor has been doing, right? And so everything's dependent on what they've done or what they're doing. So it becomes like a master-slave relationship in that way.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that the resistance, defiance, rebellion doesn't have its own pleasures. It does, and I'm not condemning people for not living up to being totally free. I'm definitely not, and most people aren't. Nobody is, probably. Right. Maybe we can look at well, you really want to go there.Maybe Jesus Christ, maybe that's a free person. Right. But wow. but like where else are we going to find that? It's just very rare. So yeah.
How is Jesus a free person?
Well, that's one of the models of freedom that we're using for me that I'm using is like, I stand in my integrity. And so much of this standing in my integrity is me reflecting on my relationship with the cosmos or God or whatever. And I'm so in my integrity that it actually heals others when they're in my presence and allows them to be compassionate and kind to others who they normally would hate. And I even give myself up to the integrity, and to the coherence. And so I think there's a lot of ways to, slightly, like, I don't want people to get into the like, well, no, what actually it says in the Bible is blah, blah, like whether they hate the Bible or love the Bible, but I'm just offering a version here that maybe we can, an example of someone who's probably free most of the time.
I've heard
you
you
know.
use this phrase. I've heard you use this phrase "stand in my integrity" a few times on your show.
Mm.
I've heard you say. What does integrity mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't like that term, so I think I'm just shorthanding. I think I'm just outside of my integrity when I use it, because it sounds so like Ken Wilber, like systematized
Are you
bullshit.
sitting? You're sitting in your integrity.
Yeah, I'm sitting, wallowing in my integrity. I mean, I think it's you know, what I'm really trying to get at there is, again, just a sort of orientation to a kind of orientation. That's why it's positional. Stand in my integrity is an orientation to a certain way of being, which again is thinking with intention, feeling with clarity, doing purpose. Yeah.
Okay. Having a purpose. Now, what does this look like day to day, hour to hour? What lifestyle? Like what do you mean, man? Like what is it? What kind of a person is that? What kind of choices would I be making if I'm living with intentionality and purpose
Well,
and
first,
clarity?
yeah, I mean, it will take us down a real weird occulty path, which is, you know, first I want people to examine their experience, right? Like I want that for myself, but the world is not as it seems. I mean, you know this from talking about postmodernism so much, but I think those guys just don't take it far enough. The world is just not what it seems. I mean, the world is completely bizarre and our experience is completely bizarre. And there are a lot of ways to begin this experiment of that path. And so the moment you do that, so the thing I always say is, like, when people are like, what are your politics? It's like, you have to ask yourself, what is the human being before you start developing real political opinions? Because where the fuck are these, where are these unfurling from? Where are they coming from? And so I think that's what I would first start asking is, and when you start examining your experience, really, it gets really fucking weird. It gets really weird. You know, if you just do the thing, and I think we might have talked about this before, but if you just do the thing where you're like, I can't see my own face, I mean, it immediately blows everything out of the water because when you realize that everybody on the planet can apprehend you in a way that you can never apprehend yourself,
right?
We have a completely different relationship to the world.
Right.
You know, or if you just ask yourself, when I'm looking at things, am I seeing objects or am I seeing colors against colors against colors? Is it really three-dimensional or not? Or is three-dimensionality coming from a blend of a bunch of my senses? When you start asking yourself, what's happening when I'm thinking? What are my thoughts? My thoughts are not my thinking. So what's happening there? I mean, it just gets fucking crazy. And, you know, you can't do all of it. You probably don't want to do all of it all at once. You got to develop somewhat. But once you start doing that, things, including whatever your political positioning or your ideas about society and ideas about other people, start, you know, changing. And so that's one of the moves for sure.
The world is not what it seems. Correct. That is so correct. And you find that out when you read a novel like Hawk Mountain.
That's true. Yeah.
That's what I meant about novels, in the good novels like yours, which is that you immediately see, oh God, the surface is just the surface of what we see. You know, what goes on behind people's eyes, behind their faces. Right.
I'm glad you're saying that, because I mean, one of the things that people have reported to me, a lot of people, about reading the novel, is that their sympathies keep switching from character to character. And part of that is because, you know, I've kind of had it with this. I don't think it's been good for anybody to have this, like, the worst thing you did to me makes me innocent in all ways. I mean, that's just not true. Right. But we can't forget the other side of it too. So in other words, I wanted to make sure that, you know, no one was left unaccountable, but also no one was left unforgiven. And that can only happen when you're just shifting back and forth, occupying the space of different characters, you know? And any novel, by the way, is a bizarro occult thing, because I mean, what the fuck is this that you like look at symbols and they transmute themselves into photons that enter your eyes and turn upside down, and then suddenly you're experiencing emotions and meaning and all. I mean, that's what the fuck is that?
What the fuck is that?
And it's even worse when it's a novel than nonfiction, because you're co-creating the images with the author,
Would you call that magic?
I think it's an experience. I think magic is maybe something else. I mean, I think you broadly call a lot of things magic, but I think magic is more of an exercise. Mostly what people think of magic is more of an exercise of the will, but this is actually a sort of reciprocal act of just kind of being. I think it's something that's offered to us and given to us.
Okay. Now you've used the word occult twice.
Yeah.
Now this is something I was going to say you're very interested in, but no, you do a lot of work on it, and much of your podcast is devoted to it, and you've taught courses on it, you've written about it, you've talked a little bit on here about it. I've tried to, I keep asking you to come on here and talk about the occult, and it's never really happened. We did a little bit, like 10 minutes.
He's too scared of it, dear listeners. He's too afraid of it.
Oh yeah, yes, very scared. Just think of darkness and pentagrams and people in like devil's horn masks and stuff. But so I got in touch with you to come back on the show because this past year, the right wing, I suppose, at least in this country, I don't know if it's been in other countries, started to talk about the occult and started to blame things on the occult. Sexual deviancy of various kinds, the trans movement especially, they started to say was because of the occult. And they started to say things like, the elites that run the world. And by the way, I do think there are elites that run the world, and I'm with them on that general proposition. But things like Disney has the occult within it, and that's why Disney is trying to groom our children in various ways, etc. I don't know. I just saw like people on Fox News use the word occult a few times this year, and a lot of right wingers on Twitter, of course, using it. And it would just got around. For the first time, I saw people on the right talking about the occult, and I thought, well, I got to talk to Connor. Connor's going to set all of us straight on this. Connor is going to explain to my listeners what the occult really is, and he will make them feel better about it, and maybe make me feel better about it. Now, I've told you many times I know nothing really about it, about the occult. I have a feeling the audience here is similar, although I'm sure there's some people who know much more about it than I do. Would you mind giving us a primer?
Yeah, I mean, I can try, and I can try to do it while addressing the things that you brought up politically. I mean, I think the problem with just talking about there's so many different versions of what we mean by it. Okay. Is it, and mostly when people try to describe it, they just sort of describe the accoutrement, like, oh, tarot cards or robes, or women dancing naked in the woods, or whatever it is. And so to the extent that people point to those kind of things that can stem out of it, I think that you can utilize that however you want. I mean, sure, it's like so good and bad people use tarot cards, I mean, what do you want, so it's that, I think that's weird to talk about that way. I mean, the right has talked about the occult for a long time, right? I mean, whether it was QAnon stuff or the satanic panic, or even just if you had religious fundamentalists talking about, don't mess around with these forces or whatever. I think within all religious traditions, there's always an occult sort of branch of religious tradition, whether you have certain Sufis doing things that look, like the occult, or you have Rosicrucian Christians or esoteric Christians, or like the white brotherhood, which means something completely different in Bulgaria, started by Peter Dunov, who was a allegedly Einstein's spiritual teacher, who's an occultist, or so you have it all over the place. And then of course you have the Church of Satan, and of course you have people that are trying to do magic and all this. And I think politically it gets so wrapped up in real misapprehensions. Like the left, when it finally decided to include the idea that maybe we want to kind of look at the occult, even though it already had so much occultism in it already, when they started wanting to talk about it, they mostly talked about it as like witchcraft is a sort of practice of the beleaguered underclass, or the feminist witches against the patriarchy, or witches against capitalism, or whatever, which of course is like a real nonsense framing of it, because yes, people in power also use the occult all the time. I mean, if you look at the Reagans, like having their psychic advisors, you look at Kamala Harris's ties to the Masonic like police force, and that's mainstream media. I'm not like going down any rabbit holes. There was like, one of her aides was like part of this weird police force, or whatever. All governments have something going on with it. So the state is definitely using and invested in the occult, and so is the proletariat, the underclass, like whatever you want to say. So it's everywhere. I mean, you could, as a right-wing thinker, say, if you wanted to do actual research, which you wouldn't, like, like Hegel was influenced by the Hermetic tradition. Guy Debord was very interested in the occult and had a friend who was an occultist. Zizek was a member of an art movement that included people who were making occult art. I mean, you could say all these things if you wanted. You could make all these connections, and then as someone if you wanted to accuse the right of doing it too, you could, like I said, reach for the Reagans. You could reach for the brainwashing of the picture of Trump and the Czechs putting their hand on the orb, or whatever the fuck. I mean, you can go anywhere, or you can just Marianne Williamson's talking about going to the moon, and like talking about, magic and new age stuff. It's all over the place. So it doesn't lie anywhere politically. What matters for the conversation you're talking about, I think, is people are weaponizing it in the same way that they weaponize sex. They know that it'll get a strong reaction because it's so deeply linked to, in a lot of ways, who we are and how we see the world. I mean, the occult is offering up metaphysical, ontological, phenomenological propositions all the time. So as soon as you ask a big question, you're occult adjacent, if not in it, like totally, And the same thing with sexuality. It's like when we start really interrogating our desires, it's very dangerous. And then of course there's crossover between occult and sexuality, which is, even more frightening. But you have, I'm sorry, I'm going to go on just a little bit more, but again, it's just, you have all these political figures, Helen Keller is a socialist, deeply influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg, who she even wrote a book about Emanuel Swedenborg, who talked to angels and told people how to do, rituals to talk to spiritual beings. Paschal Beverly Randolph, friends with Abraham Lincoln, was doing sex magic to end slavery. It's just like again and again and again. And so people that frame the occult as left or right, I mean, it's just wrong. I mean, it's so uninformed and wrong to frame it either way.
Okay. So now you named a whole bunch of things and people and practices that you're suggesting are part of the occult. Everything from tarot cards to psychic readers to Kamala Harris's Masonic police organization. You could be right. I have no idea if you're right. So now tell us, how do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, you could say that part of what I'm doing with the work that you mentioned is just trying to give people a right definition of it. And for me, that's that the material that the conception of the world is made out of matter and motion or objects is incorrect, and that if we really again look at our experience, we see that non-materiality is a much more correct way to describe the world. And once you do that, you notice that the world is a non-material landscape populated by non-material beings, including things that we would refer to now as spiritual beings. And that all it really takes is investigating your experience and then developing more and more into that experience. And I mean, this is something that lots of religions have said, time and time again, but we live in such a materialistic culture that it's very easy to confuse material things for spiritual propositions. So for instance, clairvoyance, I brought this up on my show in reference to my own thinking, but also this guy, Scott Elliott Hicks, who I've had on my show, where it's like clairvoyance, people will say, oh, that's actually spiritual. But it's like, if we're talking about real non-materiality, if a clairvoyant is saying to you, you came to me to find your necklace. I can see it. You dropped it behind the refrigerator at whatever. Not only is that materialistic because someone's just coming to someone for spiritual help looking for a necklace, but it's materialistic because they're thinking in material images. So even thoughts of material images that are based on sensory perception is materialism. It's how materialism works. So what I'm proposing, and it's not my proposition, I mean, it's a lot of occultists have worked on this over time, is that the world is not made up of stuff, and that we've framed it that way for certain reasons that are important for, the development of humanity. But now it's time to move past that. And that's what it is.
The world is not made up of stuff.
No, the world is not made out of objects, but evolving states of consciousness.
Which is a very postmodernist thing, too. Right? I mean, there's no difference really in that statement between occult and postmodernism.
Yeah, except the postmodernists very often they don't it's like they don't take it seriously enough. Like even the ones that I really like, I mean, it's all dialectical materialism, which is, I just find like a dodge. It's like, what I want to know is, are they really experiencing things in the way that they're describing them, at least some of the time, which is not just the stuff. Now, I know occultists do. I know I myself have, many times, and I don't need to take hallucinogenic drugs to do it. It's how I walk through the world a lot of times. How I experience things is in non-material terms and experiences. But a lot of postmodern, you just kind of don't. It's like they're intellectualizing it, and so it's real in the same way that your reflection is. It's a flat surface that's giving you a kind of ecology of factors that make you think you're seeing something three-dimensional, but there's no real depth.
Okay.
So that's, I mean, and I like a lot of postmodern thinkers, but like they're just not going there enough for me, and they end up putting things in the same way with the novel you're talking about in terms of political economy. And I'm like, if this is true, this is way beyond political economy. So you need to drop that,
So what would it mean to really walk the walk, not just not just intellectualize it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to refine that question, because you can do it in a lot of different ways,
Well, what are you frustrated about specifically with people like Walter Benjamin or Michel Foucault not walking the occult walk, but just talking the talk?
Benjamin's probably the best of them, I mean, and he was sort of pre-postmodern, but he was the most sort of occulty out of all of them.
That's true. That was a bad example. Yeah.
But Foucault's fine, and Deleuze is probably the other like good example of someone who was really striving, although ultimately I think kind of didn't get it. But I think that my frustration with them is that like there's no the very first most important factor is usually missing, which is there's no way to say anything exists other than my consciousness. I mean, that's fundamental. There's no way to say that. I mean, and you and I talked about this years ago. There's no way to assert the existence of anything outside of my consciousness, because any assertion would come as an extension from my consciousness. And in fact, that project is an anti-human project, because you're trying to project a nothingness, into a place where something is. That's why I like Deleuze. He always says there's an abundance, not a negative or a lack. So while I like people like, Lacan or Foucault, or, even I like some of the critical theorists, like, I don't think that they're really starting from where you need to start from. So they're just reproducing the same thing as materialistic science, of which I think Terence McKenna said, science, give us one miracle and we'll explain the rest. It's like, you got to start at the right place, which is that consciousness is fundamental. And once you do that, things change, and you can't adhere to dumb things like, and sorry for everybody that doesn't know any of the shit I'm talking about at all right now, but that's okay, because Google exists and I will explain anything that Tad asked me to explain. But it's like things like object-oriented ontology, where people are like, what does the dresser drawer think? We need to decentralize the human being in existence and talk about starfish and whales and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, fuck off. Like, none of that's true. We only know things because we are consciousness, and everything extends from that.
How is that not what postmodernists all have said? Everything is from and a product of human consciousness. There's nothing outside of it.
They usually say it's from language, right? And this privileging of language is one of my real problems with it, because it's just another economy. And there's a great book called I mean, I have my issues with it, but there's a great book called Technic and Magic by Federico Campagna, who I've had on my show, that is all about this. Like, this sort of too much emphasis on language just sort of creates things, sort of recreates an equation version of things, and it doesn't work. And I think it's better, if you're going to be reading these philosophers that say language is everything, read Emerson instead, who's like, really will give you what language is, which is something more living, and profound. So I think it's not thought, it's consciousness, by the way, which is very different than thought.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to define again. I know it's annoying, but what's the difference between consciousness and language?
Language, I mean, we don't think in language, and this is a real hard pill for people to swallow. We can direct our thinking into language, but we think in, sorry, this is an overwrought term because of the internet, but we think in content, which is something different. And our thoughts are cast off husks of the movement of thinking. This is something that Sam Harris says, and I don't like Sam Harris in any way, but it's not whatever. He gets whatever. It's fine for him to lift things from the occult and religion and get them right, and then condemn the sources that he took them from, and pretend that he's some brilliant thinker and not just a thief. But he says, like, this is true, that thinking and thought are not the same thing.
Okay.
The thought is a cast off object of the motion of thinking. An object is not the exact right word, but you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So thinking is a motion, and it's not even emotion, because that's still a physical term.
Yeah.
But we only have these words right now, so.
Isn't it a feeling?
A feeling is something different, because a thinking produces thoughts which are punctuated and complete. Feelings are never complete. Feelings are always open. They're like weather. They move in and move out. So they sort of show up kind of fuzzy at the edges, as it were. And
no, I was saying the motion of thinking is a feeling.
Oh, I see.
Isn't that a feeling?
No.
More than that? More than a feeling? Okay.
It's more than a feeling.
great song. Well, wait, answer the question. Is it more than, I mean, it is more than a feeling. There's more that, so you're saying it's the motion of thinking produces a thought, which is cast off, and then that becomes language later.
Or that's more, the thoughts are more directly related to language than thinking itself. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it becomes language necessarily, but language might be a dimension that thoughts enter into and transform into something that's fixed, but that's a whole other thing.
So before I'm thinking in words, before I'm thinking in language, there's something that precedes that, you're saying, right? Which is, which you can't quantify, you can't write it down, you can't even see it, right? It's not discrete in that way. So it sounds like amorphous and maybe like a feeling, which you're saying is consciousness.
I wouldn't say it's a feeling. Thinking and feeling and action are different things. And in fact, one great occult practice is to separate thinking and feeling and willing or action, and to sort of examine them on their own, to see what's really happening when we go to pick up a cup, for example, or when we're having a strong feeling about someone or something, or when a thought arises or appears out of the movement of thinking. I think those three things, once we start to pull those apart, we can have real, like, crazy experiences of reality. One of the great ways to do that is actually to separate thinking and feeling. She's not so good on the action part, but there's a woman named Byron Katie who's just a spiritual teacher. She does something called the work. She's asked 4 questions, and if you ask these 4 questions, and I mean, I can run through them with you, but I don't want to get too sidetracked. It's, is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? How do you react when you think that thought? Who would you be without that thought? When you do this, you start separating thinking from feeling, and something really crazy happens usually, which is that you experience love, which is such a strange thing. Like, splitting thinking and feeling always generates a sense of love. But it's true for all the others, separating thinking from action, separating action from feeling, all that kind of stuff.
Hold on now. When you separate thinking from feeling,
everybody, welcome to the Psychomantium. Yeah.
When you separate thinking and feeling, it produces love.
You experience real love, right? Like, if you're having a horrible feeling about someone, I fucking hate that person, usually there's a thought behind it, right? So you sort of put the feeling aside and investigate the thought. And when you investigate the thought, usually, I mean, that's a Stoic move, right? Like, it is not, who is Epictetus? It is not our thoughts that, it's not events that upset us, but our thoughts about events that upset us, right? So, like, you pull apart the thing that's happening, that's creating the feeling, from the thought you have about it. And you realize, okay, with the thought, she's trying to manipulate me. You have a whole set of emotions and reactions to someone. Without that thought, the difference between your apprehension of this person and therefore your entire day and reality and whatever sometimes is a thought, and so that's when you start experiencing the sense of love, when you sort of pull those two things apart, because the thoughts are not bound to the feelings and constantly stirring them up. Does that make sense?
Not yet. What does love mean?
Well, I'm not just sort of peddling her, but if you go to thework.com, like, it's all free. I mean, there's even people that you can call and, like, do the process with for free. And like I said, it's not going to give you everything you need, but it's really helpful in that.
Okay, I guess, but can you just define love then, and then we'll go to another topic?
I can't really define love, because it's
I mean, for her in this framework.
Well, the same thing. It's the sort of it's at this point in time, or at this point in existence, it's the wellspring of all creation. So you can't. So it's touching. So love is in everything, but it's up to us to recognize its presence, and experience it. I think that that's it. And it's not that and even when you're not experiencing it, it's not like your experience is an illusion. It's just that it's love in a different form that you're not recognizing as such, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. We'll table that for now. So
let Byron Katie explain that one to you guys.
Okay, but the occult.
Yeah.
And so earlier on, it sounded like you were saying, that, people on the left, people on the right have used it, from the Reagans to Kamala Harris to left wing to feminist Wiccans.
To all classes. Yeah.
Right. So it sounded like you were describing it almost as a tool that could be used. It could be used for any purpose.
I think once you get into one of the things that's revealed from investigating the occult, or even doing any kind of spiritual practice, really, which is that the world is not as it seems, and that things aren't just material, you begin to realize you can fuck with that to do things, right? And I think that that's what magic is. And that's why I distinguished before with reading. Maybe at some point before, anybody could read, and some people were developing the system that was magic. But I think now it's so permeated, not everybody's life. Obviously, there's a lot of illiteracy, but it's just not that anymore. So I think so when you see, I can control people by commanding the non-material reality in some way or another, then that's when it's a tool. Okay. It's not a revelation so much as a tool,
by using language to persuade people,
or commanding spiritual beings to do your bidding. Okay. You can certainly manipulate people with language, and I do think that can happen. I mean, we all do that. We do that when we want to get away with something in our relationship, or we want to get a refund, or we want to roast someone on Twitter or whatever it is. But I mean, to the extent that some people are knowingly doing that, for sure, I think that some people have occult inclinations when they're doing that. They're trying to use magic to brainwash people. But I also think you can really just, you can fuck people up by assembling ritual and material and all that in different kinds of ways to enact your will. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So back to it being a tool.
Yeah.
But it can be clearly used for various political purposes.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so it doesn't have an inherent politics in it.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
No, there's no inherent politics. I mean, the same way there's no inherent politics to sex. Well, it's bigger than politics, so it can't be contained by politics. It can be utilized for political reason.
It sounds though to me like it might be inherently anarchic.
I mean, I can kind of see why you're saying that, but will you say something a little more about that?
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like it is the occult, since it's, I don't know, when was it established? Was it ever established? I mean, I don't know, but the occult, certainly in the modern age, has been antagonistic to social norms in themselves. I mean, to the idea of a norm, a social norm. Is that right? I mean, it seems to me to be subversive of all the basic norms of our civilization.
It depends on who you are. I mean, the Church of Scientology is founded on the work of Aleister Crowley, stolen by L. Ron Hubbard and John Whiteside Parsons, from John Whiteside Parsons, who is one of Crowley's students. And that's permeated Hollywood. So movies are so much of Hollywood is intimately linked with Aleister Crowley. I don't have an issue with that in all instances, and I don't even have an issue with the Church of Scientology in the way that some people do. I mean, I'm not singing its praises, but I feel the same way about it as I do about Mormonism. It can have beautiful aspects to it, and it's probably also fucked a lot of people up and been wielded the wrong way. But and Baha'i and all these other sort of new religions. But I think that, like, yeah, it's not. It depends on where you're standing when you're saying it reinforces the norm. I mean,
Okay.
I think what you were saying something before about, like, maybe trans people, like right people on the right saying, well, trans is a part of, sort of occult practice or whatever. I think that part of that, I think it's not going to do trans people any favors if I say I think that's true. But what I think is being reached for there is the dangerous, and rightfully so, and appropriately dangerous, aspect of trans discourse, which is that we're not just our bodies, that we're something more than our bodies, which is, can have a non-material aspect to it. Now, not all trans people have to see it that way. And I think it's really, because occultists who are not on the right will say also shitty things about trans people. Like, well, reincarnation is real, so why didn't they just wait until they came back as the gender that they wanted to be? Which is just also fucked up and stupid. But so, like, trans people have to do whatever the fuck they want to do to mediate their own sense of who they are. But as a sort of proposition, this idea of non-materiality in some instances, when we're talking about trans stuff, coupling with an idea of sexuality, I mean, that's a real potent mix that people are fucking afraid of. And they should be, because it's true. They should be because it's right, because that actually is reflective of reality.
Okay. Yeah, you started off with a very interesting and useful, I guess, definition of the occult as at its base being a rejection of materialism. Right? I love that. And so trans people are born into a body, a material thing, material body. And then they say, no, this body is not what's real to me. It's something that you can't see. It's something that's inside of me, or maybe not even inside of me, but you can't see it. It's not material. And I am something other than this body, than the material world that you see. And the right wing, and even a lot of left wing, because there's plenty of left wing materialists too,
and transphobes, yeah,
sure. But I think in a sense, what pisses them off the most about trans people is that it's the denial of material reality.
I think that's
how dare you deny what is obviously true. It's right in front of us. It's your fucking body. That's material. It's real. You can touch it and feel it. It has color and shape and size and strength. And how can you possibly deny that? That is who you are, right? And so the occult would say, right, that the material world is not what's really going on.
Yeah. And so isn't it interesting that a lot of those right-wing people are the same people that are pretending to believe in God and spirituality?
Yeah, I know.
Right? When they can't even accept that they can't even accept people that are showing up and being like, maybe material reality isn't what you thought it was, And again, we have to say, and the only reason why I'm being careful about this, because I've heard other people who are into the occult talk about this topic in a way that I find extremely irresponsible. Trans people don't have to be on board universally with what we're saying right here. I'm just saying part of the thing that's threatening to people who are anti-trans, and especially if they're bringing up some sort of they're from Satan or whatever, it's not just about, oh, you're fucking with gender dynamics. It's about actually fucking with the fabric of reality. The trans people are way more powerful than people think. And I think that's very profound. And, I think really sort of wrongly, like, other right-wing people have been like, this is part of the great reset, like, AI, transhumanism, and transgenderism, like that kind of horseshit. When it's like, actually, no, it couldn't be further from that. It's actually the opposite of that. It's actually saying like, now, and again, not all trans people are going to agree with this. Some trans people will say that it's part of that, and happily say that it's part of that. But when you're saying that it's not just quantitative measured stuff, like you can't talk about putting your fucking brain in a computer and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's just horseshit, you know?
Okay, wait a second. Let's do this some more. So yeah, I've had people on my show who have said this, that transgenderism is part of transhumanism, and transhumanism comes from the occult, but it's also it's anti-human, and it's leading us to a very dark science fiction dystopian future in which, I'm trying to think of what the fantasy is, in which there will be no genders, and therefore we are more easily manipulated by the globalist elite. I think that's how it goes.
Yeah, I don't get it at all. I mean, to me it sounds like someone is just like when you're trying to tell a lie and you're like, you know, because they're like transhumanism, transgenderism, you know, it's like when you're trying to tell a lie and someone's like, where were you? And you see like the calendar on the wall and you're like, I was at the calendar store. Like, it just seems like they're reaching for the thing that's right in front of them, and like just trying to like, because their brains just got fucking scrambled, because I just don't see the thread at all. Look, everything is going the way of transhumanism in the bad sense that's a function of materialism. That's a function of materialism. Exactly. That's not a function of trans people or whatever. Right. So we can lump all of it in, including my occult spiritual proposition, including whatever enlightened Buddhist or reverend or pastor or whatever that anybody wants to talk about. All those people are along for the ride of like, fuck, materialism is fucking us, so we need to do something about it. But like leveling against trans people seems to be the exact wrong target for me. You know?
Transhumanism is the merger of computer technology with human bodies,
and well,
so that's materialist, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that they're saying like you're not in your body or what. I mean, I don't exactly know. First of all, I think most of it's bullshit, and I think AI is. I mean, I think it's also dumb to me that people are like, all we're trying to do is make people so stupid that when computers can, you know, we're trying to make people as stupid as computers, so we can be like, look, computers are thinking what people think, but actually we just made people dumb. It's not that computers are smart. But I mean, so I think that like that's all like, it seems so wrong and weird.
No, but I mean, it is about enhancing the human body with computer technology. So, and technology is of course materialistic, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
So
there's aspects of technology, and the human body and technology are also spiritual. It's just you have to understand how they're spiritual and like how that works. Yeah,
but I'm saying it, but I'm agreeing with you. I mean, I think the transhumanism is materialist in that it's attempting to use material things to enhance our material lives. You know, our bodies, computers, technology, computer chips in the brain.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like when people are like, wow, I'm going to put on, remember like the Oculus Rift, I don't know what the fuck the product is called now, but like, you know, I put on Oculus Rift and like, I can have any identity. I'm going to be in the metaverse and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're not leaving your body. Actually, what you're doing is you're sinking into subnature, because you still have to use your body to access the technology, to pretend you're not using your body to access technology. So it's not, it's subnatural. It was below nature even. So I think that's like, that kind of stuff is so so ridiculous that people would think that that was some sort of liberatory thing. It's actually just forcing you into two bodies, and so, you know, like into a shell, an extra shell. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, but that in some ways is almost like, it's not a repudiation of the occult, but it is certainly not a cult. Is what you're saying.
That move, yeah, that mindset is, no, you're right. I mean, it's the opposite it's certainly the opposite direction.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
but we could, but we could also sort of occultize. We could redeem that through a different spiritual perspective, and that's what we're going to actually have to do, is liberate these moves from themselves with spiritual perspectives.
Okay. Now, you said something about trans people and the power of trans people that is sort of sometimes recognized and sometimes not. Can we do that again? Because I really want to make sure that that's clear. That I want to hear again what you think is the power of trans people. What's so important about what they're doing?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to say there's a lot of important things that trans people are doing. The part that we're talking about right now is the people who are trans who are saying no to materialism. And that is in a lot of ways merged also with sexual understanding. And those two things are very powerful. I mean, just think about how much discourse is around trans people. There aren't that many trans people, just like there aren't that many gay people or that many as a definitional thing. There are probably a lot more trans people than we know. They're probably like the whole definition of it is probably not that great, all that kind of stuff. But like, but how much like discussion there is, that's proof of the power that's happening there. But whereas, you know, always conservatives fear, you know, the thing that actually, if they would just sit with, they would see was this really wonderful thing. It's like when people were like, well, if gay people get in the military, they'll destroy the military. And if they get married, they'll destroy marriage. And it was like, fuck yeah. Like that would be the best, you know. It's like their fears are always the thing that we want to achieve, you know.
Right. But on a deeper level, keep talking about what's important about trans people.
Yeah, I mean, well, I feel a little out of,
because just so you know, I mean, you do know this, but I mean, like, because some people either think it's nefarious or they think it's trivial.
Right. Yeah. Well, right. We want people to think it's trivial in the sense that they don't
frivolous
think about it all. Yeah, frivolous. It's not frivolous, right? Yeah. I mean, well, tell me a little bit more why you want me to sort of talk about it. Is it just because of that? Because I don't think. Yeah.
Because for me, I mean, I'm annoyed by a lot of it, and I've been. I mean, before there was an identifiable, in the 1990s, I was up in classrooms talking about gender being a social construct, and it is your gender is your choice and all that stuff. So of course, like the basic politics of it, I'm 100% behind and always have been. But there is an essentialism, of course, that goes on within the trans movement now, which is this weird thing where they say, no, even though I was born into a man's body, I'm actually really a woman. I was born a woman. Which is a repudiation of the idea of gender being a social construct, right? And that's what annoys me. And also, the insistence that the rest of us abide by their pronouns, by their, you know, identity, that we recognize them as they want to be. I'd find it annoying and sort of narcissistic.
I see. I'm not bothered
but that's only some trans people, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I mean, I've known lots of trans people who are fantastic about that stuff, and they're not like that. But
well, look, I mean, just look. It's like, I mean, it's like any group of people. Like I'm not like a Caitlyn Jenner or a Charlotte Clymer fan. I mean, fuck them. You know what I mean? It's but like you have plenty and people who want trans people to be in the military, and that was like the big cause under Donald Trump or whatever. Like, I mean, fuck that. I'm not on board with any of that because it's a waste of time. And we have to learn with all groups, whether it's trans or, you know, that awful thing, which is that we have to, it's awful, but it's true, which is that we have to fight for those who are fighting against us, you know, which is a really hard thing. So when you see someone like, you know, conservative trans people or conservative queer people or conservative Black people or whatever, you know, or certainly, I'm not saying conservative white people because it seems so obvious, but like you have to, your moves have to be to include them, and that's rough, that's
Okay.
rough sometimes. And I don't really feel the same sense of sort of abrasion or annoyance that you do, but I mean, I'm not really encountering any
But what do you
of it
like about it? What do you like about it?
about.
The whole thing, the trans movement, trans people being trans.
I mean,
Denying.
look, I think the bottom line with these kinds of things is like what kind of world do we want to live in? Like, do we want to live in a world where we're like telling people not to do what is in their heart? I mean, this is absurd to me. Like, that's the bottom line when it comes down to it for anybody that's arguing it. For me, it's like, well, I can talk about rights, determination, I can talk about gender as a social construct, but I'm like, usually it's the same fucking people that are like, get your hand off my fucking gun or whatever. I'm like, great, I won't, like, and I realize that sounds like a libertarian position, but really, I mean it actually in a, like, we can think about guns and whether or not we want them, but not until we back off and say, like, God, I don't know why I reached for guns in this discussion. I was just trying to think of like the easiest talking point for I could have said abortion. I could have said anything, anything that's like a super polarizing topic where people sort of use it as the pivot or the fulcrum for all their politics. Right. I think it's just like, what kind of fucking world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where it's just, like regulate first through the state and then ask questions after, if we ask questions at all? Or do we want to live in a world where we try to get along with each other and support each other in occult terms, and living out your own karma and experiencing your own individuality to the fullest, And
that's what trans people are doing.
A lot of them. Yeah.
But I mean, just rejecting the materiality, I guess, of their body's designation, I guess is the word. Isn't that in itself what you consider to be quite radical and profound?
Well, just to sort of pull it away from trans people, because I feel like we're talking about that. And again, I'm not trans, so I'm not, we can all access we can all access the abandonment of materiality, and we should, because it's, first of all, it's not true. Second of all, the world becomes more exciting and alive to us when we do that. Third, it reorients us to better political and economic decisions, much less cultural ones. And it can reveal, new things to us. It's not gonna be an easy path, and it's going to have its own obstacles and dangers along the way, certainly. But, at least let's fucking get honest here, and stop talking about, well, I'm going to take my thoughts and personality and put them into a computer as zeros and ones, or I'm, the world is made out of like my fucking SUV and, like, and my dumb apartment, and, or the world is run by capitalism and, those kinds of forces. I mean, it's all horseshit. And there's something to be looked at in all of those. It's all important, but we need to look at that as a consequence of being honest with ourselves about what being human is, instead of just going there first and pretending we know what we're talking about. And I do it all the time. I'm a total asshole when this comes. I talk about shit I don't know all the time with total certainty, like I have some fucking clue. But I also try to adjust my posture into, an honest place as well.
Okay. So back to trans people, though. So
I'm trying, dear listener, to get away from talking about a group of people I'm not a part of. Yeah.
No, the last thing, though. I mean, but it does sound like you would agree that there is a connection between the trans movement or transgenderism and the occult.
Well, yeah, but that's because there's a connection between everything and the occult.
Oh, well, come on.
That's what I was saying before with all the political.
No, but wait a minute. No. Come on. I mean, it's more occult than other things, isn't it?
No. I mean, I think that the revelation of non-materiality has taken a mainstream stage in this discussion, which I think is, I think that's profound. In the same way that, but it could have been other things. And in the same way that Marianne Williamson, for all my issues with her, was like saying all these like occulty things when she was in the presidential primary. And I was like, fuck yeah. Like, thank God, someone's actually doing this and being honest about it. And people were like kind of looking at her like, who the fuck is this? And I was like, who the fuck are you? Like, yeah, she's talking about like calling Donald Trump and saying, I love you. You're talking about like not giving a shit that people are in poverty or invading Iraq because you used to be a fucking soldier there or whatever. Who the fuck are you? So right. I mean, I think whenever these things take the stage in a way that, I think it's something to take note of. And I wish the discussion, whenever non-materiality did take the stage, would find a foothold that wasn't either divisive. No, you know what? I'm not going to say that because I think it will have to be divisive because we're actually splitting the occult atom.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you, I'm kind of drawing that from a title of a very small pamphlet about I think it's called Nuclear Energy and the Occult Atom. But I think, yeah, there's a whole realm of books out there for people,
about nuclear energy and the occult?
Well, just about the occult and everything. I mean, it's just fucking cool, like you might think that you've heard it all, but like but I'm constantly finding new things. But I think, yeah, I mean, like when we split matter in a material way, you have this insane explosion when you split the atom, so to speak. When you decide to actually break the atom up from what it is instead of what the illusion is, then the explosion is an explosion of creation and abundance instead of just destruction.
Yeah, it can light up cities or it can destroy cities.
Yeah, and I love the Wilhelm Reich, who would have been pissed off that I called him an occultist, but Wilhelm Reich, if you look at his cloudbuster, pointing up at the sky to bring sexual liberatory orgone energy to people's lives and to enrich them and to liberate them, it looks the same as a fucking military cannon, but it has the exact opposite effect,
Right. Okay. Last thing I want to do with you is I want you to tell us who Aleister Crowley was.
Oh no, I'm not good with him. I don't know enough about Aleister Crowley, but there's a great book by P.T. Misselberger called Three Dangerous Magi, Crowley, Osho, and Gurdjieff. And everybody should read that because it's a real honest appraisal of Crowley in light of these two other sort of dangerous magician kind of people. People probably know Osho from that documentary series, I think it's called Wild Country or something like that. That was on Netflix.
He was on my not Osho, but his main advisor was on my show.
Oh, cool. Who's that?
Swami Prem Niren is his name.
Okay.
Now. Yeah.
Okay.
He was on the show years ago. Yeah, it was an amazing episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
But all right. Well,
can I ask you a little bit of a challenging question?
Sure.
Then? Why do you think you're not having those kinds of people on as much anymore? It seems like there's a lot of sort of politically frustrated people on the show.
Oh.
And I say that but I'm just wondering, and you seem more politically frustrated, when in fact all these things that we're talking about seem to be enlivening and like freeing you from that tangle.
Yeah.
But you seem like that's happening more. And I don't mean that. I'm not trying to cost you on your own show or whatever. I'm just interested because you and I haven't spoken in a while. And, I'm wondering.
Well, that's Connor. That's why you're on the show now.
May you be peace be with you.
So we can talk about things like novels, and they make me happy. No, yes, you're right. It does make me unhappy. The political life. I say this all the time on my show. Two political people, when they come on, I always say to them, "Do you ever get sick of being political?" And they always say, "Yes, I hate it. It's the worst thing in the world." So yeah, it's just, I was literally born into it, and it's just been in my sort of DNA, for lack of a better term, my whole life. And it's probably, I'm sure there's some Oedipal things going on here with my parents, needing to do something against my parents in some way. I don't know, proving them wrong, maybe. Who knows? But it's been an obsession my whole life, and I do like it, though. I mean, I do like a lot of it, and I'm good at it, and that's why I do it. And it's also really important. I think it's very important, and I think especially if you have a non-materialist politics like I do,
Mm,
then it's even more interesting. I mean, I don't do politics the way most people do, right? I talk about it in very different ways,
mm,
and I'm not super limited and constrained the way that most people are in politics, where they just talk about what happens in Washington D.C. as being politics, right? Or even institutions and economics and all that stuff. That's Politics is much deeper than that. To me, it's cultural primarily. And so I'm interested in really political culture, and the
mm,
way we think about things and the way we even feel about things. I just had a super egghead debate between Curtis Yarvin and Ben Burgis that I moderated in
mm.
Chicago. And I asked them both at the beginning, because I knew they're massive brainiacs, both of them. I said, I want to hear what you guys feel about democracy. Tell
Yeah,
us what you feel about democracy. And after
that's
3 hours of talking, they never did. But that's what
it's
I
hard.
want.
It's hard to get to. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my favorite discussions about politics I ever had, I had Abby Martin on my show, and Abby and I are really good
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
But I instead of talking about what was going on in the world, it was just why do we do this? You
Nice.
know?
Yeah.
And she was like, no one asked me this before, right? It was really nice. But I think, like I just, how do I say, like, there's that danger, and I wonder if you feel it in yourself sometimes, of just like I was talking about the religious fundamentalists being people that are like talking about freedom and non-materiality, becoming people that want regulations and total materialism. There's a way in which talking about libertarian politics and joy and pleasure and freedom can turn into a kind of embittered political battle that
Oh,
sometimes I worry, from some of the people you're talking about or some of the paths you're going down, that you're like, I don't know, because I'm not talking to you, so I only see what's on the surface. So
uh-huh.
I not the surface, that's actually too glib. I'm only seeing certain expressions of what you're going through.
Uh-huh.
So I am just like, where is he with this? Like, is he actually experiencing the liberation and redemption and emancipation and excitement, or is it just like becoming more and more crystalline and only accreting from the outside, so that he can't get to the heart of what's happening for him?
Um,
And I would ask you all this if you were on my show. So this is not a, I'm not trying to sneak attack you or anything like that. I'm just
no,
interested because we haven't
no, no,
spoken
no.
in a while.
Oh no, it's totally fine. Yeah, well, okay, so my experience with the world I operate in, the work I do, has changed in the last couple of years. I have thought largely because politics has changed in ways that have been really unpleasant and
Mm,
uncomfortable for me. And I've gone through some stuff online that was extremely unpleasant and related
mm,
to what we were talking about today, the right wing and their obsession about grooming and the occult and all that stuff.
mm,
Um, and but actually not just what happened to me specifically. It's just that the culture has
mm.
changed in the last year or two in a way that has crowded out a lot of the discussions that I've used to have, like with people with you, like
Yeah.
with you, um, because you know it's just very difficult to talk about things like rejection of work and sexual freedom these days, because no one's interested in those things right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
it's just not on the table. And so like, and or like sex work, right? I mean, like I used to talk about sex work more than anybody in podcasting, except for sex workers like you and Maggie, and there are people. But I don't do it anymore because no one, not only are people not interested in it, people are like embarrassed about it and afraid to talk about it because the
Mm,
right wing will jump on us for
mhm,
mentioning such a thing because, oh my God, we're all child molesters because we want to talk about sex work being legal.
mm,
I've
mhm.
seen lots of people, even on the left,
Of course, yeah.
make fun of the sex worker movement, and I'm like, wait, why? Why is that now stupid and wrong? I mean,
Mhm,
you want to keep it illegal, um, and yeah, and I'm glad you asked this because I have felt this for a while now. Is that frustrated in not being able to do what I used to do all the time on the
mm,
show and in my work and in my writing and in my teaching. And it's just been the last year or two, but it's been a real shift in the political culture. Uh,
mm,
and Twitter's horrible, and this is where politics is enacted is on Twitter. And so you really get a sense of how people are thinking on Twitter, unfortunately. And what we're seeing on Twitter is just this real age of reaction is
mhm.
what I think of it as. We are living in a profoundly reactionary moment, and I hope it's just a moment. I hope it changes again. But like things like a liberatory counterculture from below, like we used to see, in various ways, from the hippies to the punk rockers and whoever, is not around anymore. And instead, it's just people fighting about teachers grooming children in classes because they're trans and talk about their husbands I mean, it's just,
Mm.
and a lot of it's very clearly just straight up homophobia that I think was like kept quiet for many years after the gay marriage movement won, and we're finding out that that did not get rid of homophobia. I mean, a lot of this anti-trans stuff is just straight up hatred of homosexuality and homosexuals, clearly. And that comes with a whole lot of repression. And we're just it's an age of it's a reactionary age we're living in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's the reaction, of course, and I think there's also, and here's an occult, concept of the cultural sphere and the political sphere and the economic sphere actually being separate. They overlap, they interconnect, but the problem comes when one of them tries to dominate the others, or two of them go in conjunction to dominate another. So culturally, theocracy, politically, it could be any political,
Yep.
domination,
Yep.
or economically. Obviously, we can
Yep.
understand what that one might be.
Yep.
And none of that works out. And when as many leftists try to make the cultural sphere fall in line with the political sphere, it's not good. And this is this is where cultural Marxism is kind of a thing, even though the conspiracy about it is just that's horseshit, and like all that is like that's all dumb
Right.
and wrong.
Right.
But like when you look at someone trying to subsume the cultural sphere into but then the opposite is also just as bad, where people try to make politics fall in line with with religion, or they try to make it all fall in line with economics, which is some of the libertarian capitalist propositions and whatever. But I think like you have people really dedicated to a worldview that's inside one of those spheres, trying to control what's happening in all the others, but actually they all need to be strengthened in their own right and then come together to be able to speak with each other. And this is culturally, when we're talking about novels before, or spirituality or whatever, this is where we can really give strength and power to the cultural sphere, because cultural sphere is individuals, the political sphere is two or more people, and economics is the all, it's everybody.
Huh.
And so if we empower really individuals, but really do it, not empower them for the sake of politics, which is what most people are doing on all sides of the spectrum,
Yep.
but really feed people's imaginative, spiritual, sexual, free lives, musical, artistic, all that kind of stuff. They'll have the strength to encounter politics without being dominated by it, or and consider economics without just falling prey to sort of the current of the way things go. And so I think that that's some of what I see, what you're talking about. And I think, I think sometimes when you or other people are speaking about something that's cultural or political, and people confuse it for an argument in one of the other spheres, like that's where some of the reaction comes from, especially if they're specialized in that sphere. So you get this like thing where it's like you're asking someone how they feel about politics, or democracy. What's your imagination? What are you creatively experiencing this? How's this lived in your life as an individual? And they're unable to answer.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that's not surprising to me.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Political people are never able, almost never able to answer those questions.
Yeah. So I think that that's where some of the frustration and anger is coming from. And I think I think that you're probably experiencing some of that frustration yourself as well. So, I just want to ask you about it
all the time. So who should I have on my show besides you?
I mean, there's just so many people, man. I mean, like the truly dangerous people right now, like in the sense of like the sort of unregistered episodes, the ones that like I think you're aspiring to do. Like I think they're the ones that are really confronting, capitalism and communism as a set, not as necessarily opposing forces, or like people are encountering all the sort of, I would just say all these sort of old ideas and thinkers with like some amount of scrutiny, and the people are saying, what can I do to bring this forward? Obviously there are Marxist thinkers I have huge admiration for, and anarchists I have huge admiration for, and capitalists I have huge admiration for, but it's the ones that are saying, how do I bring this forward to actually get out of the set? Because the set is not working anymore. These are just one thing that appears to be two, and it's not working. So, I mean, I'm not giving you specific examples, but we can talk about it off air. I'll give you specific examples. Yeah.
we will. No, I love that you said that. And I love that you asked me those questions, and it's probably going to set me in a new direction.
Good. I mean, and like I come back like a week later and you're like, I'm broadcasting from a cave, and but no, I think I love that. Good. It's nice to see you, and it's good to talk with you about these things, and I hope, I hope that we all leave behind what needs to be left behind in this year, because I've had so many things change, and so have you, and so is everybody I know, like really. And so taking up the responsibility of like, what do I leave behind this year, and like, what do I do going into next year? I mean, maybe Twitter won't be here. I mean, wouldn't that be fucking exhilarating? Like, what are we gonna do? Like, live our lives, and like, and find new ways to communicate in text. That because we have other image-based apps and stuff, or maybe we'll just be like, fuck social media. That would be fucking amazing if we just, like, the tritium and nuclear weapons, we were like, if we actually just don't make anymore, it'll decay at its own rate and they'll just go away, and then we'll just never build another one of these fucking weapons again, because the social media is just a weapon, and we can just, it didn't used to be, but we have to meet it where it's at now, and we can just be like, we're just going to do things a different way, I mean, that would be fucking cool. Who knows, who knows, man?
Today, now that people are talking about Twitter going down, I thought I had to think for the first time ever, what would my life like? What would my life be like if Twitter goes dark? And my first thought was it'll be better.
Totally. It would be better now. If this had happened in 2018, I would have been like, oh, fucking bummer. But like, I think now, again, it's like, if you have a friend who's like saved your ass and been a great friend and you're loyal to them, and then just like for years treated you like shit, you have to meet them where they're at now. You can't just keep codependently having the image of them, that you had before. And I mean, as I said before, things can be liberated at any moment. Twitter could be fucking great tomorrow too. I don't know. So, but like, I think I'll, just to talk about Twitter for a moment here, because maybe this will be the last podcast you do when Twitter is really a thing. It's like, I'll miss having 64,000 people like who I have a connection to, but most of them I don't know I have a connection to. Like, that's fucking cool. And that matters to me. And it's giving me a sense of like, it's giving me whatever. So it's probably more like, 55,000, because a bunch of those are bots or not active anymore. But it's like, it's giving me a sense of, I don't know, stability, safety, love, connection,
Sure.
possibility, all that kind of stuff. But like, who was I not meeting because of that as well? And like, what was I not doing, and what was I not focusing on? And we'll just see.
For me, it's about feeling again. I mean, the feeling I get from being on Twitter is not a good one usually. Sometimes it can be exciting and can open possibilities, of course, but overall it's not a good feeling. And I'd rather feel more direct connection with people like this, even though this is funny, even though you're in Dublin, I'm in Oakland, but like still it's much closer, much better than in Twitter.
Way better.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's also like, I mean, I started limiting my interaction with Twitter like 2 years ago. I unfollowed everybody who hasn't been on my show because I just couldn't take timelines anymore. I just couldn't take seeing what people were doing, and I wanted to disengage more and more. But I mean, definitely like this kind of stuff is more profound. And I don't know. I had something to say, but I can't remember what it was, because I think my brain's just sort of hitting the twilight hour of 7 p.m. here in Dublin, where it's like super early there.
I'm well aware. Well, and then in that case, we can wrap it up here. But yeah, we will continue talking, and we will be in closer touch. And you're gonna give me ideas for guests for my show that are gonna make me feel better. And thank you, though. I gotta say, thank you for writing Hawk Mountain.
Thanks, man.
You made my world better, certainly, by writing it. And thank you for coming back on the show, and thanks for coming back in my life.
Oh, thanks, Ted. It's really nice to see your face, and yeah, I'm glad. This conversation is very enlivening for me, and it sounds like it is for you too. So we'll have another one sometime. Yeah,
we will indeed.
And thanks everybody for listening. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Connor.
This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the unreported news analysis show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.